Have you ever been made to feel small? Have you ever been told you didn't matter, that you were invisible, or worse, useless? In the high-stakes world of New York corporate finance, Veronica Gills thought she was untouchable. She thought she could crush the quiet, older woman in the archives just to flex her power. She dragged her into the center of the office and fired her in front of 50 people just to hear the echo. But Veronica made a fatal calculation error. She didn't check the personnel file, she didn't check the marriage license, and she certainly didn't know that the useless woman she just humiliated was the one who signed her paychecks. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens when you wake a sleeping giant. The air conditioning in the open-plan office of Novatech Solutions was always set to 68 degrees, a temperature designed to keep the coders awake and the executives comfortable in their Italian wool suits. But for Carolyn Banks, sitting at her cramped desk near the server room, it was freezing. Carolyn was 42, though her lack of makeup and the oversized, slightly frayed grey cardigan she wore made her appear older. She was the data entry coordinator, a title that meant she spent 8 hours a day digitizing paper archives from the 1990s. She was the ghost of the office. She made the coffee when the pot ran dry, she unjammed the printer when the Gen Z interns couldn't figure it out, and she never ever spoke out of turn. To Veronica Gills, the 30-year-old vice president of marketing, Carolyn was nothing more than office furniture, and ugly furniture at that. Veronica was a force of nature, or at least she tried very hard to be. She wore Louboutins that clicked aggressively against the polished concrete floors, and she spoke in a volume that ensured everyone within a 50-foot radius knew she was closing a deal. Veronica had joined Novatech 6 months ago, brought in to trim the fat and revitalize the brand. On this particular Tuesday, the rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 40th floor in downtown Manhattan. The atmosphere was tense, the quarterly review was coming up, and rumors of layoffs were circulating like a bad flu. Carolyn was minding her own business, carefully scanning a stack of invoices from 1998 when a shadow fell across her desk. The smell hit her first, an overpowering wave of Chanel No. 5 and nervous sweat. Carolyn, Veronica's voice wasn't a question, it was a summons. Carolyn looked up, adjusting her reading glasses. "Yes, Ms. Gills?" "Stand up," Veronica said. She wasn't looking at Carolyn, she was looking at the reflection of herself in the glass wall of the server room, checking her hair. Carolyn stood slowly, her knees popped slightly, a sound that seemed deafening in the sudden quiet of the office. "Grab your box," Veronica said, gesturing vaguely to a stack of empty supply boxes near the printer. "My box?" Carolyn asked, her voice trembling slightly. Veronica sighed, a long, exaggerated sound that signaled she was dealing with an idiot. She turned around, clapping her hands twice. "Everyone, eyes up, earbuds out. Now." The office, populated by about 60 employees, went dead silent. Heads popped up from cubicles. The marketing team froze mid-brainstorm. Even the janitor, pushing his cart near the elevators, stopped. Veronica smiled. It was a shark's smile, all teeth and no warmth. She walked over to Carolyn and placed a hand on the older woman's shoulder, not in comfort, but to position her like a prop on a stage. "We talk a lot about efficiency here at Novatech," Veronica announced, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "We talk about value adds and ROI. And unfortunately, we have some dead weight that has been dragging our metrics down." Carolyn felt the blood drain from her face. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of Tom, a young analyst she often shared her lunch with. Tom looked down at his shoes, terrified to make eye contact. "Carolyn here," Veronica continued, patting Carolyn's shoulder with a condescending rhythm, "has been with the company for how long, Carolyn?" "For 14 months, technically," Carolyn whispered. 14 months, Veronica laughed. "And in 14 months, can anyone tell me a single contribution she has made to our bottom line? Has she brought in a client? Has she coded a line of software? Has she even updated the social media page?" Silence. "No," Veronica answered herself. "She files papers. In a digital company, she is the definition of redundancy. She is useless." The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Useless. Carolyn gripped the edge of her desk. "Ms. Gills, please, can we discuss this in your office?" "Why?" Veronica snapped, dropping the fake smile. So you can beg. So you can cry. I don't have time for tears, Carolyn. I have a company to run. I'm doing this out here so everyone understands the new standard. If you aren't bringing in money, you are stealing it from the shareholders. Veronica grabbed a ceramic mug from Carolyn's desk, a cheap chipped mug that said World's Okayest Cat Mom, and held it up. Pack your things. You have 5 minutes. Security will escort you out. Veronica, a deep voice cut through the tension. It was David Salisbury, the CTO. He looked pale. Maybe we should… Quiet, David, Veronica hissed, not even looking at him. This is a marketing budget issue. She's under my cost center. I'm cutting the cord. She turned back to Carolyn, her eyes narrowing. Why are you still standing there? Do I need to call the police for trespassing? You're fired. Get out. Carolyn took a deep breath. For a second, just a split second, her eyes changed. The timid, watery look vanished, replaced by a cold, hard steel that nobody in that room had ever seen before. She looked at Veronica, not with fear, but with something bordering on pity. Are you sure you want to do this, Veronica? Carolyn asked. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was level. Veronica laughed, a harsh bark of a sound. Am I sure? Oh, honey, I've never been more sure of anything. You're a stain on this office. Go home to your cats. Carolyn nodded slowly. She didn't pack a box. She didn't grab the picture frame of her golden retriever. She simply picked up her purse, smoothed down her grey cardigan, and looked Veronica dead in the eye. Okay, Carolyn said, I'll go. She turned and walked toward the elevators. The click-clack of her sensible loafers was the only sound in the cavernous room. 60 people watched her walk the Green Mile. As she pressed the elevator button, she didn't look back. The doors slid open, she stepped in, and the doors closed, sealing her away from the humiliation. Veronica clapped her hands again. Show's over, back to work, unless you want to join her. The office exploded into nervous typing, but the air had changed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a sense of doom. Down in the lobby of the Novatech building, the security guard, an older man named Jerry, looked up as the elevator dinged. He smiled when he saw Carolyn. Heading out early today, Mrs. Banks? Jerry asked cheerfully. Carolyn gave him a tight smile. You could say that, Jerry. Just a change of plans. Shame about the rain. It's pouring buckets out there. It's fine, Jerry. My ride is here. Carolyn pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the wet pavement of Fifth Avenue. The rain was indeed torrential, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon and grey. Usually, a fired employee would be hailing a yellow cab or trudging toward the subway station, clutching a box of personal effects and crying into a tissue. But Carolyn didn't move toward the subway. She stood calmly under the awning of the building next door, checking her watch, a Cartier tank watch that was usually hidden beneath the sleeve of her frayed cardigan. 2 minutes later, a sleek black vehicle pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Bentley Flying Spur, its polished black paint gleaming like oil in the rain. The back door opened, and a man in a sharp suit stepped out holding a massive umbrella. He wasn't a driver. He was security. Mrs. Banks, the man said, shielding her from the downpour. Mr. Banks is on the secure line. He's concerned you left the transponder off. I'm fine, Arthur, Carolyn said, sliding into the plush leather back seat. Just a bit of a rough afternoon. Inside the car, the silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the office she had just left. Sitting on the other side of the back seat was William Banks. William was the CEO of Novatech Solutions. He was the face on the magazine covers, the man the tech world called the architect. He was 50 years old, handsome in a rugged way, and currently looking at his wife with a mixture of confusion and concern. You're out early, William said, closing his laptop. Did the audit finish? Did you find what you were looking for in the archives? Carolyn sighed and leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes. She pulled the grey wig off her head, revealing a cascade of honey-blonde hair that had been pinned up tight for months. She took off the thick-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. I found plenty, William, she said softly. But the audit is over. I was just fired. William blinked. He stared at her for a long moment, processing the sentence. You were fired. Publicly, loudly, and with a great deal of enthusiasm, Carolyn said, a dry smile touching her lips. Apparently, I am useless. I am dead weight. And I need to go home to my cats. William's expression darkened. The warmth left his eyes, replaced by the cold, calculating look that had terrified competitors for 2 decades. Who? Veronica Gills, the new VP of Marketing you brought in from Chicago. William pinched the bridge of his nose. Gills, the one with the aggressive restructuring plan. I approved her hire because her numbers at her last firm were impressive. Her numbers are impressive because she cooks them, William, Carolyn said, her voice sharpening. That's what I found in the archives. She's been diverting marketing budget into shell vendors for consulting fees. I found the paper trail today. I was about to copy the files when she marched over and made a spectacle of me. She fired you, William repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. She fired my wife. She fired the woman who owns 51% of the voting stock of this company. She doesn't know who I am, Will. To her, I'm just Carolyn the temp, the frumpy lady who makes the coffee. William reached out and took Carolyn's hand. His grip was tight. We are turning the car around. I'm going up there right now, and I'm going to… No, Carolyn said firmly. She squeezed his hand. No, you aren't. Carolyn, she humiliated you. I'm not going to let that slide. And you won't, Carolyn said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous intelligence. But if you go up there now and scream at her, she'll just play the victim. She'll say she didn't know. She'll settle for a severance package and walk away to ruin another company. We need to do this properly. Properly? William asked. The annual gala is this Saturday, Carolyn said. The masquerade theme, remember? William nodded slowly. Yes, the entire executive board will be there. Investors, the press. Veronica has been desperate for an invite to the VIP table. She's been trying to get a meeting with the CEO for months to pitch her new vision, Carolyn said. Let's give her what she wants. Let her come to the gala. Let her think she's won. Let her think she successfully trimmed the fat. Carolyn looked out the rain-streaked window as the Bentley merged into traffic. I want her to look me in the eye when she realizes who I am, William. I want to see the moment her world breaks, and then I want to destroy her. Not with a scream, but with a whisper. William looked at his wife, the woman who had helped him build Novatech from a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire, the woman who preferred to stay in the shadows because she hated the fame, the woman who was the true tactical genius of the operation. He smiled, but it was a scary smile. Okay, William said, pulling out his phone. I'll send the email. Veronica Gills is cordially invited to sit at the CEO's table this Saturday. The automatic doors of Novatech Solutions had barely slid shut behind Carolyn before Veronica Gills spun around on her heels, the adrenaline of the confrontation coursing through her veins like champagne. She felt lighter, taller. She had just publicly executed the office mom, the one person everyone relied on for emotional support, but nobody respected for business acumen. It was a power move, pure and simple. All right, show's over, Veronica barked, her eyes sweeping the room. The deadline for the Q3 projections is in 4 hours. I want every single one of you to justify your existence here, or you can join Carolyn on the pavement. Am I clear? A murmur of yes, Ms. Gills, rippled through the terrified staff. Heads bowed, keyboards clattered with frantic, performative energy. Veronica smirked and marched toward her corner office, her heels punishing the floor. She slammed the door shut, twisting the blinds closed. The moment she was private, her demeanor shifted. The imperious executive vanished, replaced by a frantic conspirator. She pulled her encrypted phone from her blazer pocket and dialed a number. It's done, she hissed into the receiver. I got rid of her. A male voice on the other end answered, smooth and unbothered. It was Greg Hastings, the chief financial officer of Novatech. Greg was a man who wore $5,000 suits and had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was the only person in the building who knew what Veronica was really doing with the marketing budget. You fired the archive lady? Greg asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Was that really necessary, Ronnie? She's harmless. She brings in donuts. She wasn't harmless, Greg, Veronica snapped, pacing the length of her office. She was digging. I saw her screen before I walked over. She had the invoice folder for Apex Consulting open. She was cross-referencing the vendor IDs with the employee database. There was a pause on the line. The amusement vanished from Greg's voice. Apex? That's the shell account for your personal bonuses. How did she get access to that? That's level 4 clearance. I don't know, Veronica whispered, her voice rising in panic. Maybe she guessed the password. Maybe she's not as stupid as she looks. She was asking David about discrepancies in the server logs last week. I thought she was just confused, but today… She looked at me, Greg. She looked at me like she knew. So you fired her? I had to. If she takes those files to compliance, we're finished. I made a scene, called her useless, and threw her out before she could print anything. She's gone. Security escorted her out. She didn't take any files. Good, Greg said, his voice relaxing. Smart, aggressive, I like it. Without the hard drive, it's just the word of a disgruntled fired temp against the VP of marketing and the CFO. Nobody will believe her. She's a nobody. She's a nobody, Veronica repeated, reassuring herself. She wears cardigans from 1995. She probably doesn't even know how to use the cloud. Exactly. Now focus on the gala. I heard a rumor that William Banks is finally going to announce the new partner track on Saturday. If we play our cards right, with the cost savings you just demonstrated by firing the support staff, you could be in line for a massive promotion. I deserve it, Veronica said, checking her reflection in her monitor. I'm the only one in this company with any teeth. Just make sure the apex trail is scrubbed, Greg warned. If Banks decides to look closely… Banks is a visionary, Veronica scoffed. He's too busy looking at the horizon to look at the dirt under his feet. He trusts you, and he doesn't even know I exist yet. We're safe. See you Saturday, Ronnie. Wear something expensive. Veronica hung up and leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile returning to her lips. She had neutralized the threat, she had asserted dominance, and now she was going to the ball. Saturday arrived with a crisp electric energy that only New York City could provide. The Novatech annual Masquerade Gala was the event of the season, held at the Plaza Hotel. It was a night where the tech elite mingled with old money, where deals were struck over champagne towers, and where careers were made or destroyed in the span of a single conversation. In her penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, Veronica Gills was in a state of euphoria. Earlier that morning, a courier had arrived with a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with gold leaf. Inside was a VIP invitation to the gala. But it wasn't just a standard ticket, it was a seat assignment. Table 1, the CEO's table. Veronica had screamed when she opened it. She had assumed she would be at table 15 with the rest of middle management. But table 1, that was reserved for the board of directors, major investors, and William Banks himself. They noticed, she whispered to her reflection in the vanity mirror. They finally noticed. She had spent the entire afternoon at a spa, getting scrubbed, polished, and primed. Now she slipped into her gown. It was a blood-red silk dress, backless and daring, designed to draw every eye in the room. She paired it with a black Venetian mask adorned with black feathers. She looked dangerous. She looked like a conqueror. She was ready to claim her kingdom. Across town, in a brownstone that was far more understated but infinitely more expensive, Carolyn Banks was also getting ready. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The grey wig was gone, replaced by her natural hair, a lustrous honey-blonde mane that cascaded in soft waves down her back. The reading glasses were replaced by contact lenses that made her piercing blue eyes shine. The frumpy cardigan and sensible shoes were a distant memory. Carolyn stood before a full-length mirror, wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that shimmered like a starry sky under the lights. It was structured and regal, hugging her curves in a way that Carolyn, the data entry coordinator, never would have dared. Around her neck hung a necklace that would have paid for the entire Novatech office building, a sapphire and diamond pendant that had belonged to William's grandmother. William walked into the room, adjusting his tuxedo cuffs. He stopped dead when he saw her. "My God," he breathed, "I almost forgot what you looked like without the office camouflage." Carolyn smiled, but it was a cold, determined smile. She picked up her mask. It was gold, delicate, and covered only the upper half of her face. It was the mask of a queen. "Are you ready?" William asked, stepping up behind her and placing his hands on her waist. "I'm ready," Carolyn said. "Is Greg Hastings coming?" He is. He RSVP'd for the head table. He thinks he's getting a bonus. And Veronica? She confirmed an hour ago. She requested a seat next to me. Carolyn laughed softly. Of course she did. She wants to pitch you her vision. She's going to get a vision, all right, William said grimly. Legal finished the review of the files you recovered from the archives. It's worse than we thought, Char. She and Greg have siphoned off nearly $3 million in 6 months. Fake vendors, inflated consulting fees, kickbacks from ad agencies. They were bleeding us dry while firing low-level staff to cover the losses. Carolyn turned to face her husband. Her eyes were hard. She fired me for stealing from the shareholders. That's what she said. She called me a thief while she had her hand in the till. Tonight it ends, William promised. Tonight, Carolyn corrected him, tying the gold mask around her eyes. It begins. We aren't just firing them, Will. We are going to dismantle them. I want them to feel every ounce of the humiliation they inflicted on the staff. I want them to know exactly who they messed with. The limousine ride to the plaza was silent. As they pulled up, the paparazzi were already flashing their bulbs. William stepped out first, offering his hand to Carolyn. When she stepped onto the red carpet, a hush fell over the photographers. They knew William Banks, but they didn't know the stunning woman in the midnight blue gown. Who is she? A whisper rippled through the crowd. Is that a model? An actress? Carolyn kept her head high, her hand resting lightly on William's arm. They breezed past the press and into the ballroom. The room was a kaleidoscope of color and masks. An orchestra played a haunting waltz. Waiters with silver trays wove through the crowd. At the center of the room, near the stage, sat table 1. It was set with crystal and gold. Veronica was already there. She was sitting in her assigned seat, sipping champagne, looking around with a triumphant gleam in her eyes behind the black feather mask. She spotted Greg Hastings approaching and waved him over. Can you believe this? Veronica whispered to Greg as he sat down. Table 1. I told you, Greg. They love me. It is impressive, Greg admitted, adjusting his silver mask. Banks must be planning to make you the new CMO. Why else put you here? Quiet, here he comes, Veronica hissed. The room seemed to part as William Banks approached the table. He was the sun everyone orbited around, but tonight he wasn't alone. Veronica watched as William walked toward them, accompanied by the most beautiful woman Veronica had ever seen. The woman in blue moved with a grace that made Veronica feel clumsy in her high heels. She radiated power. Good evening, everyone, William said, his voice projecting authority. Veronica stood up immediately, flashing her brightest, most charming smile. Mr. Banks, it is such an honor. I'm Veronica Gills, VP of Marketing. William looked at her. His expression was unreadable behind his simple black mask. I know who you are, Ms. Gills. Please, sit. Veronica sat, her heart pounding. He knows who I am. William turned to the woman in blue. May I introduce my wife, and the majority shareholder of Novatech, Mrs. Carolyn Banks. Veronica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Wife? She didn't know he was married. He never talked about her. The tabloids never saw her. Charmed, Veronica said, extending a hand to the woman in blue. Carolyn looked down at Veronica's hand. She didn't take it. Instead, she slowly sat down directly across from Veronica. We've met, Carolyn said. Her voice was different, lower, smoother, stripped of the timid wobble she used in the office, but there was a cadence to it, a rhythm that struck a chord of familiarity in Veronica's brain. Veronica froze. I don't believe we have, Mrs. Banks. I would certainly remember. Oh, you'd be surprised what you forget when you don't think a person matters, Carolyn said, her blue eyes locking onto Veronica's through the gold mask. Tell me, Veronica, how is the efficiency drive going? Did you manage to get rid of all the, what did you call it? Dead weight? The blood drained from Veronica's face so fast it left her dizzy. The room seemed to tilt. That voice. It wasn't possible. The woman in front of her was a goddess. The woman she fired was a frumpy, middle-aged nobody. But the eyes. The blue eyes were the same. Greg Hastings sensed the shift in tension. Mrs. Banks, surely you don't concern yourself with the day-to-day hiring and firing. Carolyn turned her gaze to Greg. Actually, Mr. Hastings, I concern myself with everything. especially when it involves the marketing budget being diverted to a company called Apex Consulting. Greg dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing through the sudden silence at the table. Veronica couldn't breathe. She stared at the woman in the gold mask, her mind racing, trying to deny the impossible reality that was staring her in the face. Carolyn leaned forward, the diamonds at her throat catching the candlelight. "You have 5 minutes to finish your drink, Veronica," Carolyn whispered, "because the police are waiting in the lobby, and I'd hate for you to be thirsty during your booking." The orchestra was playing Vivaldi's Winter, the frantic, icy strings slicing through the air, perfectly underscoring the absolute zero temperature that had settled over table 1. Veronica Gills sat frozen, her hand hovering halfway to her champagne flute. Her brain was misfiring, trying to process the data in front of her. Mrs. Carolyn Banks, majority shareholder, wife of the CEO, but the woman sitting across from her, this radiant creature in midnight blue velvet with diamonds dripping from her ears, could not be the same woman Veronica had physically shoved toward the elevator 4 days ago. It wasn't possible. That woman had frizzy grey hair. That woman wore polyester cardigans that smelled like mothballs. That woman had the posture of a frightened mouse. This woman sat with the spine of a ballerina and the gaze of a sniper. "I don't understand," Veronica stammered, her voice barely a whisper. You said we've met. But I would remember someone like you." Carolyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She reached into her small, beaded clutch. Veronica flinched, as if expecting a weapon. Instead, Carolyn pulled out a pair of thick, black-rimmed reading glasses. She didn't put them on. She simply set them on the white tablecloth between them. The object was so mundane, so out of place among the crystal and silver, that it screamed for attention. Veronica stared at the glasses. Recognition hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. They were the same glasses the archive lady wore, the same glasses Veronica had laughed at when she told her to pack her box. "Oh my God," Veronica whispered. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her looking like a wax figure. "Carolyn, you're the archive temp." "I prefer data entry coordinator," Carolyn corrected her, her voice smooth as silk. "It sounded more humble on the resume, don't you think?" "I wanted to see how my company was really running, Veronica. I wanted to see how the managers treated the people who couldn't fight back. William runs the boardroom. I watch the floor." Greg Hastings, the CFO, who had been dabbing sweat from his forehead with a napkin, suddenly let out a strangled laugh. It was the sound of a man whose lifeline had just snapped. "You were the mole," Greg choked out. "The discrepancies in the server logs, the glitch in the payroll system, that wasn't an error. That was you." "That was me," Carolyn confirmed. "I spent 6 months in that basement archive. Do you know what you find in archives, Greg? You find the ghosts of bad decisions. I found the duplicate invoices for Apex Consulting, I found the offshore routing numbers, and I found the emails between you and Veronica discussing how to frame the IT director if anyone got suspicious." Greg stood up so fast his chair toppled backward with a loud crash. The music stopped. The entire ballroom turned to look at table 1. "This is entrapment," Greg shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "You can't prove anything. Those were marketing expenses, valid expenses." "Sit down, Greg," William Banks said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of an executioner's command. "You're making a scene." "I'm leaving," Greg snarled. He looked at Veronica. "I'm not going down for this. She signed the checks. It was her idea." Veronica gasped, whipping her head around to look at her co-conspirator. "Excuse me? You told me how to structure the shell company. You said it was foolproof." "And it would have been if you hadn't fired the CEO's wife," Greg screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Carolyn. "You idiot! You arrogant, narcissistic idiot! You just had to humiliate her, didn't you? You couldn't just let her file papers." The guests at the nearby tables were no longer pretending to eat. Phones were out. The elite of New York were recording the meltdown of the year. Veronica looked around wildly. Her carefully constructed facade of the girl boss genius was crumbling in real time. She looked at William, her eyes pleading. "Mr. Banks, please. I didn't know. If I had known who she was." "If you had known," Carolyn cut in, her voice cutting through the noise, "you would have kissed my ring. You would have brought me coffee. You would have been my best friend." Carolyn stood up slowly. She picked up the cheap reading glasses from the table and crushed them in her hand, the plastic snapping with a dry crack. "But the test wasn't about how you treat the CEO's wife, Veronica. The test was about how you treat the person who cleans the coffee pot. And you failed." As if on cue, the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open. 4 officers from the NYPD, accompanied by 2 federal agents in suits, marched into the room. They didn't look like they were there for the hors d'oeuvres. They headed straight for table 1. "Veronica Gills? Gregory Hastings?" the lead agent asked, flashing a badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." Veronica backed away, her hands trembling. No, this is a mistake. I'm the VP of marketing. I'm a keynote speaker." "You have the right to remain silent," the agent said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut on Veronica's wrists was louder than the orchestra had been. She looked down at the metal restraining her wrists that, just moments ago, she thought would be holding a promotion letter. "Carolyn," Veronica sobbed, the fight leaving her body. "Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Carolyn looked at her. There was no joy in her face, only a profound disappointment. "You're not sorry you did it, Veronica," Carolyn said softly. "You're just sorry you got caught." The agents led them away. Greg was shouting legal threats. Veronica was weeping, her mascara running down her face, ruining the expensive Venetian mask she was still wearing. As they were marched past the press line, the flashes went off like a lightning storm, capturing Veronica's downfall in high definition. The ballroom was silent for a long moment. Then William Banks stood up. He adjusted his jacket, looked at the stunned crowd, and raised his glass. "My apologies for the interruption," he said calmly. "Please enjoy the dessert. The chocolate mousse is excellent." He turned to Carolyn and offered his arm. "Shall we go, Mrs. Banks? I believe we have a company to rebuild." Carolyn took his arm. "Let's go home, Will. I have to feed the cats." Monday morning at Novatech Solutions was usually a chaotic symphony of ringing phones, clacking keyboards, and the hiss of the espresso machine. But on the Monday following the gala, the office was silent. It was the silence of a tomb. Everyone had seen the videos. The footage of Veronica Gills being led out of the plaza in handcuffs had gone viral within an hour. It was trending on Twitter, TikTok, and LinkedIn. The headline was everywhere: "Marketing VP arrested at gala after firing CEO's wife." The employees sat in their cubicles, terrified. They were replaying every interaction they had ever had with Carolyn, the quiet lady in the archives. Tom, the young analyst, was staring at his screen, pale as a sheet. "I borrowed $5 from her for lunch last week," he whispered to the woman next to him, "and I never paid her back. I owe the owner of the company $5. I'm going to be fired. I'm definitely going to be fired." "At least you talked to her," the woman hissed back. "I ignored her for 6 months. I didn't even say bless you when she sneezed." The elevator chimed. Everyone jumped. The doors slid open and William Banks stepped out. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. He was in shirt sleeves, looking tired but focused. Behind him walked a team of lawyers and HR representatives. But there was no Carolyn. William walked to the center of the room, the exact spot where Veronica had staged her public execution of Carolyn just days before. He looked around at the faces of his staff. He saw fear. He saw guilt. "Gather round, please," William said. The staff shuffled forward, forming a tight, anxious circle. "As you all know," William began, his voice echoing in the open space, "there have been significant changes in leadership over the weekend. Ms. Gills and Mr. Hastings are no longer with the company. They are currently assisting the authorities with an investigation into the theft of company funds." A ripple of nervous whispers went through the crowd. "However," William continued, raising a hand for silence, "that is not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about culture." He paced slowly, looking each employee in the eye. "For the past 6 months, my wife, Carolyn, has been working among you. She didn't do it to spy on you. She did it because she loves this company. She helped build it. And she wanted to understand the challenges you face every day." He stopped in front of Carolyn's old desk. It was still empty. The world's okayest cat mom mug was gone. Veronica had smashed it, but someone had swept up the pieces. She told me a lot of things, William said. She told me that the printer on the third floor has been broken for weeks. She told me that the marketing team is overworked and underappreciated. And she told me that kindness in this office is a rare commodity. He turned to face Tom. The young analyst looked like he wanted to dissolve into the carpet. Tom, William said. Yes, sir, Tom squeaked. Carolyn told me you were the only person who asked her how her weekend was, every single Monday. Tom blinked. I just... She noticed, William said, and she appreciated it. William turned back to the room. We are going to make changes, real changes. We aren't just going to chase profits anymore. We are going to build a place where people want to work, where nobody is useless. Because if the person emptying your trash can see things the CEO can't, then everyone has value. Suddenly, the elevator chimed again. The doors opened. This time, Carolyn stepped out. She wasn't wearing the ball gown, but she wasn't wearing the frumpy cardigan either. She was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit that screamed authority, but her hair was loose and her smile was warm. She walked into the room, carrying a cardboard box. The room held its breath. Carolyn walked straight to her old desk. She set the box down. She pulled out a new mug, this one said the boss, and placed it on the desk. Then she turned to the stunned staff. Good morning, everyone, she said. Her voice was the same gentle tone they remembered, but the authority behind it was undeniable. Good morning, Mrs. Banks, a few people mumbled awkwardly. Please call me Carolyn, she said. I may own the majority stock, but I still know how to unjam the printer. A few nervous chuckles broke the tension. We have a lot of work to do, Carolyn said, her expression turning serious. Veronica left a mess. The marketing budget is in shambles, and we have a product launch in 3 weeks. I need everyone's best ideas. Not the ideas you think I want to hear. The real ones, the ones you were too scared to say to Veronica. She looked around the room. Who wants to start? For a moment, nobody moved. Then slowly a hand went up in the back. It was Sarah, a junior copywriter who had been terrified of Veronica. I have an idea for the new campaign, Sarah stammered. Carolyn smiled, a real, genuine smile. I'm listening, Sarah. The mood in the room shifted. The fear evaporated, replaced by a sudden surge of energy. For the first time in months, the staff felt safe. The tyrant was gone. The ghost in the archives had taken the throne. But the story wasn't quite over, because while the office was healing, Veronica Gills was sitting in a holding cell at the 19th precinct, staring at a concrete wall. And she wasn't planning on staying quiet. She had one card left to play. A piece of information she had been saving for a rainy day. Information about a third partner. Someone outside the company. Someone who had been pulling Greg's strings from the beginning. The fluorescent lights of the 19th precinct interrogation room buzzed with a sound that felt like a drill boring into Veronica Gills's skull. She had been sitting in the metal chair for 3 hours. Her red silk dress was wrinkled, her makeup was smeared, and the defiance that had carried her through the gala had evaporated into a cold, hard knot of fear. The door opened, and her court-appointed lawyer, a tired-looking man named Frank, walked in. He tossed a file onto the table. It's not good, Veronica, Frank said, sitting down heavily. The district attorney has everything. The emails, the bank transfers, the shell company registration. Greg Hastings is already cutting a deal. He's singing like a bird. He says you masterminded the whole Apex consulting scheme. Veronica slammed her hand on the table, rattling the handcuffs. That traitor! He's the CFO. He signed off on the checks. He says you pressured him. He says you threatened to expose his gambling debts if he didn't play along. That is a lie, Veronica screamed. He came to me. He said we needed extra cash flow for the rebrand. She took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing. She still had one card to play. The ace in the hole. The person who had introduced her to Greg in the first place. I want to talk to the feds, Veronica said, lowering her voice. I have information on a third party. The man who set this up. The silent partner. Frank looked up, interested. A third party? Who? His name is Arthur Sinclair, Veronica whispered. He's a venture capitalist. He contacted me 6 months ago. He said he wanted to help Novatech optimize its assets before a buyout. He's the one who gave me the routing numbers for the offshore accounts. If I go down, he goes down with me." Frank frowned. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. He tapped on the screen for a moment, his eyebrows knitting together. "Sinclair," Frank muttered. "Arthur Sinclair, wait." He turned the tablet around and slid it across the table toward Veronica. "Is this him?" Veronica looked at the screen. It was a photo of a man in a grey suit, shaking hands with William Banks. "Yes, that's him," Veronica said, a surge of hope rushing through her. "That's Arthur Sinclair. He's the mastermind. Arrest him." Frank looked at Veronica with an expression that was halfway between pity and disbelief. "Veronica," Frank said slowly, "Arthur Sinclair isn't a venture capitalist. He's the head of forensic accounting for the chaotic division of the FBI. He's been working undercover at Novatech for 8 months." The room went silent. The buzz of the lights seemed to get louder. "What?" Veronica whispered. "He didn't contact you to help you steal," Frank explained gently. "He contacted you to see if you would steal. William and Carolyn Banks suspected fraud in the marketing department a year ago. They didn't know who it was, so they brought in Sinclair to pose as a shady investor and see who took the bait." Veronica's mouth fell open. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. I mean you were never getting away with it," Frank said, closing the file. "The routing numbers he gave you. They went straight to a monitored escrow account. You haven't been stealing money, Veronica. You've been depositing it directly into a police evidence locker." Veronica slumped back in her chair. The room spun. It hadn't just been Carolyn in the archives. It had been a pincer movement. The wife on the ground floor, the husband in the boardroom, and the Fed in the shadows. She hadn't been a player in the game. She had been the ball. "They played me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The useless housewife. She played me." 3 months later, the atmosphere at Novatech Solutions had transformed. The sterile, fear-filled silence was gone, replaced by the hum of productive collaboration. The glass walls of the executive offices, once covered in blinds, were now open. Carolyn Banks sat in the corner office, Veronica's old office, which had been redecorated. The imposing black leather furniture was gone, replaced by warm wood and comfortable chairs. A cat bed sat in the corner, though it was currently empty. Carolyn was reviewing the Q4 reports. The numbers were up, morale was at an all-time high, and most importantly, the efficiency of the team had skyrocketed, not because of fear, but because people actually wanted to work. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Carolyn called out. Tom, the young analyst, poked his head in. He was wearing a new suit and looking far more confident than the terrified kid who used to stare at his shoes. "Mrs. Banks, Carolyn." "Yes, Tom?" "The team finished the proposal for the Green Tech launch. We used the strategy you suggested about community engagement. The focus groups love it." "That's wonderful, Tom," Carolyn beamed. "Great work. You're leading the presentation on Friday, right?" Tom swallowed hard. I am. I'm a little nervous." "Don't be," Carolyn said, standing up. She walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of support, not dominance. "You know the data better than anyone. Just tell them the truth. The truth always wins in the end." Tom smiled. "Thanks, Carolyn. Oh, and Jerry downstairs said the new coffee machine you ordered arrived." "Excellent," Carolyn laughed. "The old one tasted like battery acid. I'll come down and help set it up." You're going to help set up the coffee machine?" Tom asked, surprised. "But I'm the majority shareholder," Carolyn finished for him, "which means if the coffee is bad, it's my fault. Leadership isn't about being above the work, Tom. It's about being part of it." As Tom left, William Banks walked in. He leaned against the doorframe, watching his wife. "You know," William said, "you're pretty good at this whole boss thing. I might have to watch my back." Carolyn sat back down at her desk, picking up a pen. She flashed him a look that was equal parts playful and dangerous. "You should always watch your back, William," she said with a wink. "You never know who's watching from the archives." William laughed and walked over to kiss her forehead. "Lunch?" "In a minute," Carolyn said, turning back to her screen. "I just have one more thing to do." She opened her email and clicked on a folder labeled Personnel. She dragged the files for Veronica Gills and Greg Hastings into the trash bin. Then she right-clicked and selected Empty Trash. A satisfying whoosh sound filled the room. "Okay," Carolyn said, standing up and grabbing her purse. "Now I'm ready." They walked out of the office together, hand in hand. As they passed the bullpen, heads lifted and smiles were exchanged. Nobody looked down in fear. Nobody stopped talking. It was just a team, working together. And in the back corner, near the server room, the empty desk where Carolyn used to sit was no longer empty. A new intern sat there, looking a bit lost as he stared at a stack of papers. Carolyn stopped. She let go of William's hand and walked over to the intern. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Carolyn." The intern looked up, eyes wide. I know who you are, Mrs. Banks." "Relax," Carolyn smiled. "You looked like you were struggling with that scanner. It's tricky. You have to jiggle the handle to the left." She reached down, adjusted the tray, and the machine whirred to life. "There you go," she said. "Welcome to the team. You matter here." She turned and walked back to her husband. The elevator doors opened and they stepped inside, leaving behind a company that had learned the most valuable lesson of all. True power doesn't roar. It listens. And that is how the useless woman in the cardigan took down the wolf in Louboutins. Veronica Gills thought power came from a title, a corner office, and the ability to make people feel small. But she learned the hard way that true power is invisible. It's in the archives, it's in the silence, and sometimes it's signing your paycheck. This story is a reminder to everyone. Be careful who you step on while you're climbing the ladder, because they might just be the one holding it up. Treat the janitor with the same respect as the CEO. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because you never know. The janitor might just own the building. If you enjoyed this story of corporate karma and sweet revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about justice being served cold, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you were Carolyn? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.